Not only is she that, she's a writer and an author. I met Lynn, I don't even know how long ago, but I was working at Mesa, moving to end sexual assault. I was interviewing people who were going to work on the hotline because I used to be a case manager and hotline coordinator. And I remember this interview. I interviewed so many people. I was just telling Lynn, I remember interviewing her in the office, and we were talking about what made her want to get involved and help out on the hotline. And before I knew it, we became close friends. We co-led a group of volunteers. We were super group leaders together, going to retreats together. And now she's going to be this amazing author. You're all going to buy her book next year about her experience in the military. If you just want to read an article, she's published in Hill Campus magazine. And if you just read that one article, it's going to make you want to buy her whole book. So without further ado, I want to bring up Lynn Hall.
Hi, first of all, I want to say what an honor it is to be a part of your Take Back the Night. Thank you for the invitation to be here. And Jessica, thank you for your kind words. You made me blush. It means a lot to me to be a part of this event, to have the honor of speaking to the reason why we are all here, to fight against sexual violence, to shatter the silence that so often clouds rape. Like Jessica mentioned, I've been involved with Moving to End Sexual Assault, Boulder County's Rape Crisis Center, in a handful of ways since 2007. For a number of years, I was a volunteer hotline counselor, then I was a supervisor on the hotline, and now I'm on the steering committee. I've also had the privilege of working with survivors in other organizations as well. But my commitment to speak and work against fighting sexual violence is rooted so much more deeply than even a decade of being involved in the movement as an advocate. Like so many of us here, my passion and commitment to this cause is based in part on my own experiences of sexual violence. When I was a teenager, I was sexually abused by a man who had become a father figure to me. For 3 months, I didn't tell anyone what was happening. When I did finally speak out against my perpetrator, I was told that the rapes were my fault because I ought to have been able to stop him. At the time, I was 17, and I was living in a small town in Missouri that, to be honest, I didn't particularly care for. And I wanted to escape. I wanted to escape from that small town, and I wanted to escape from my family, who I felt was complicit in that abuse. And so I literally looked to the stars. I was an audacious teenager, and I decided I wanted to become an astronaut. I applied to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, where I could first become a military pilot, and I devoted my final years of high school endlessly preparing myself to that end. When I became a cadet at the Air Force Academy, I maintained a magical belief that whatever had happened to me as a teenager, in particular the sexual abuse, would be left behind. That I wasn't affected by it, that I simply could move on, and that I wouldn't ever have to tell that secret again. What I didn't understand at that naive age of 18 was that I was entering a culture which was all too often hostile to women, that far too many male cadets didn't believe women ought to be there. I was told immediately that because of my gender, I was weak. When I failed at pull-ups or doing as many push-ups as my peers, I was branded even further with this title. Some of the cadets said that women were emotional, that we were pathetic, or that we were sluts who didn't belong. Again, I didn't see how all of this affected me. I didn't consciously recognize the pit of shame that was burning within me, both for having been a victim of rape and now for being labeled less than because of my gender. 6 months after I became a cadet, a senior offered to help me study on a Saturday night. He led me to a cubicle on the top floor of the Air Force Academy library, where he raped me. This time, I told no one. I didn't even tell anyone when I developed symptoms of a sexually transmitted infection. I didn't tell anyone when 2 weeks later I became sick. I was so sick, in fact, I was admitted into the intensive care unit. It would turn out that my rapist had given me herpes, and under the intense stress of that situation, the herpes virus was able to spread into my spinal fluid, where it caused an infection in my brain. But even then, even as I realized I could die as a result of my rape, and that my doctor was missing the clue he needed to help me, I still didn't tell. When he asked me if I was sexually active, I lied. I simply said no. I couldn't even begin in that moment to face the mountain of shame that had been built. I believed my repeated victimization was my fault. That I was raped a second time proved exactly what I was told, that it was my weakness as a girl that had brought upon my assaults. Telling about the rapes would prove the points of my fellow cadets who believed I wasn't fit to become an Air Force officer with them. It would prove the point that I was pathetic, worthless. Eventually, I had to tell. It took me 4 months, but finally I confided in my doctor, who then treated me for the ongoing meningitis with the proper drugs. But the only reason I told was because my life literally depended on it. The reality is that for so many survivors, they're never forced to speak their truth, like I was. And in some ways, the emotional consequences can be even more devastating. Allowing these secrets and the shame of it to fester inside of us becomes infections, even more catastrophic than a literal infection of the brain. I recently read a book called On Being Raped, written by a man named Raymond Douglas. Raymond was raped at the age of 18 by a Catholic priest. Initially, he told, but he was blamed. And then he was silenced. He didn't speak his truth again for more than 30 years. For all of those decades, he upheld his silence, not even telling his wife. Now he writes that the trauma will likely never be healed. He said, "Rape is always now." I met another woman several years ago who had been raped in the Air Force like I had been, except she didn't tell anyone until she was in her 80s. For 60 years, she was silent. She'd been impregnated as a result of the rape, and for all those decades, she never told anyone what had happened. I heard the same accounts when I was an advocate for Mesa. Over and over, survivors who called the hotline would say some variation of, "The thing is, I've never told anyone this before." Survivors have good reason for not disclosing. Because of the culture we live in, they often understand somewhere deep within themselves they will likely be blamed. And often to tell and to be blamed is worse than never telling at all. As an advocate, when someone told me their story, no matter how much loneliness they expressed to me, I had to hold that space of disclosure for them. It would have been a breach of boundaries for me to have responded by saying, "That happened to me too." But as a fellow survivor, as a speaker here tonight, as a memoirist, that's exactly what I can say. That happened to me too. As Brene Brown wrote, "Shame cannot survive empathy." Me too shatters the self-blaming beliefs we may have held after our rapes. As survivors, that's what we can say to each other, "Me too." Sharing our stories is in many ways the path forward towards personal healing. Sharing our stories is also a path forward towards political change. When I was still a cadet at the Air Force Academy, I found a group of women who collectively said, "Me too." It was listening to that course that we realized how pervasive sexual assault is within that institution and within the military as a whole. This was 2003, before congressional inquiries on the topic, before annual climate surveys, before the Academy Award-nominated film, The Invisible War. Because of this strength we drew from each other, 7 of the women from that survivors group went to the media. They shouted until they finally got the attention they deserved. For a year, they gave interviews to nearly every single major media outlet: 2020, Today, Good Morning America, Vanity Fair, and even Oprah. They initiated a crisis at the Air Force Academy that led to the awareness we have today about rape in the military. The problem isn't fixed, but it is at least admitted to because of the courage of those women. The same thing is happening now on college campuses. The women who were featured in the documentary The Hunting Ground have band together to form a nonprofit called Ending Rape on Campus. They often speak in the media. They were just on stage at the Oscars when Lady Gaga sang Till It Happens to You. And just this week, they published a book called We Believe You. The dialogue about rape is precisely the antidote we need to the messages of blame and secrecy fed to us by our culture and the perpetrators of sexual violence. When I was raped a second time as a cadet, my perpetrator was brazen enough to let me go from that upstairs cubicle in the library without uttering a single word. He didn't threaten me. He didn't tell me that if I reported, he would claim I had wanted it. He knew he didn't need to say any of those things because the culture we lived in did that work for him. The culture had already silenced me. In that environment, I wouldn't dare identify myself as having been raped, and he knew it. That's the question that's always on my mind. In this very moment, is our culture doing the silencing for perpetrators? Every single day, there are survivors of sexual violence making the choice to either tell or not tell. I wonder what they've heard in the media, what books they've read, what commentary they've listened to regarding the actions of celebrities or famous sports players. Which sets of messages has more deeply reached them? Are they hearing the longstanding beliefs that rape survivors deserve what happened to them? That they are liars, and that their rapes somehow prove that they're lesser human beings? Or have they had the opportunity to listen to strong women stand up and say, I was raped and I'm not ashamed. It wasn't my fault. Are they hearing the messages that say, we believe you and you aren't to blame? And which set of messages are they exposed to when they disclose? I sometimes think about how my experiences would be different if, after that first time I was raped, instead of being blamed, I had been met with empathy. If someone had told me it was my perpetrator's fault, not mine. Or if I met another survivor who said, that happened to me too. I wonder if that had been the case, if I would have told someone immediately the second time I was raped. It's possible I never would have developed meningitis. And it turns out the man who raped me raped others as well. 2 women reported him before me, and 2 women reported him after me. And if that many women made criminal reports, chances are he had many, many victims who did not. I wonder if he could have been arrested and convicted much sooner had I spoken out. I wonder if those future victims wouldn't have had to endure the same things I did. I don't wonder this out of self-blame. I recognize that I did what I needed to do to survive that experience, and at the time, it was too dangerous to do anything but be silent. But what I hope for is a future in which survivors can immediately outcry and be met with genuine support. For them to have the choice to make a criminal report that doesn't in any way further re-traumatize them. The irony is that to get to that future, where these are the outcomes 100% of the time, it will take many of us to share our stories. It isn't always safe, or it isn't always possible, and it isn't always in our best interest. But when it is possible for us to stand up and say, me too, to add to the chorus of these voices, we will have the power of a community to make those changes happen. The poet Muriel Rukeyser wrote, what would happen if one woman told the truth about her life? The world would split open. I'm audacious enough to strive for something even more earth-shattering. I'm audacious enough to hope that someday all of us who are survivors can stand up and tell the truth about our lives.